Okay. We'll call this meeting to order, a regularly scheduled meeting of council for Monday, July 4th. A couple of quick announcements. Happy birthday to our brothers down south of the border as their country celebrates their anniversary. And I want to comment on Canada Day, because Canada Day, even more importantly for us, was a tremendous success. I know council attended a great part of that day and saw a tremendous number of Coquitlam residents and others that really were celebrating what it is like to be a Canadian. There were celebrations in every ethnic group, every cultural group in our community, and I want to acknowledge the staff that put that together, and all of the volunteers, all of the businesses, all the community organizations and cultural groups that participated in what I thought was the best Canada Day that we put on. And it's a real tribute to your staff for the way in which that seemed to have gone off flawlessly. And I say to Laurie McKay, Director of Parks and Recreation and Cultural Services, thank you to your staff. Please pass on our council's deep appreciation. It was absolutely wonderful. Mr. Clerk.
Thank you, Your Worship. Our first item this evening is a presentation. It's to Mr. Louis Passaglia, and it pertains to a British Columbia Community Achievement Award.
Get up here. I've never been able to order Louis Passaglia around.
Here, okay?
Thank you very much for coming tonight, Louis. You're a household name in the Tri-Cities, not just because of your achievements as a BC Lions player, but because you've used your success to impact the lives of others. And that's what makes your name truly inspiring. I looked this morning actually for my little playing card, Louis Passaglia, from about 30 years ago, and was unable to find it. I think one of my kids has
That's okay. I still look the same. Don't worry.
You haven't changed a bit, but the color was faded a little bit less than you. For everyone here tonight who doesn't know, Louis Passaglia was named a recipient of the BC Community Achievement Award in 2009. It is this reason that we're here tonight congratulating him on his lifetime of success in sport and in other parts of life. Louis' work in the fields of literacy, fitness, and positive life decisions has earned him this incredible award. Louis, you were honored because you initiated a number of the youth-based community programs while you were the BC Lions Director of Community Relations. Under your leadership and introduction of these groundbreaking initiatives, the BC Lions Community Relations Department was considered the most successful and respected in the Canadian Football League. The Read, Write and Roar program and the Lions in the House program continue on today as your legacies to the community. On behalf of Council and the City of Coquitlam, I'd like to thank you and congratulate you on your hard work and community dedication to the city that you call home and to the community of Greater Vancouver. I believe I speak for all of us here tonight when I say that you are truly an inspiration to everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you. If I could just say one thing, I'm really proud to have lived here for over 30 years in beautiful Coquitlam. We've got a great city, and this recognition tonight is not only for myself, but for all those that do great work in our community, with the youth, with the elders, with charities and so forth. And I want to thank Council and your worship for this recognition. Again, it just tops it tops being in Victoria, getting the BC Community Achievement Award there. So we're getting recognized in your own community for things that you just take for granted that you want to do every day, because we have great people here that do great things. So thank you very much.
We've produced this very expensive certificate in recognition of many years of great service.
I thought it might be in orange.
Get it? Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I should have worn my orange tie. Mr. Clerk.
Thank you. Item 2 is the minutes of the regular council meeting held Monday, June 20th. Recommendations to approve those minutes.
By Councillor Lynch, second by Councillor Nicholson. All in favor? Opposed? Carried.
Item 3 is the minutes of the public hearing held Monday, June 27th. Recommendations to approve those minutes.
Moved by Councillor Reamer, seconded by Councillor Lynch. All in favor? Opposed? Carried.
And item 4 is the minutes of the regular council meeting held Monday, June 27th, with a recommendation to approve.
Moved by Councillor Robinson, seconded by Councillor Reamer. All in favor? Opposed? Carried.
Item 5 is the minutes of the Land Use and Economic Development Standing Committee meeting of Monday, June 27th. Recommendations to receive those minutes.
Moved by Councillor Reamer, seconded by Councillor Lynch. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously.
First item of business arising out of that committee's meeting concerns a report on an application for zoning amendment bylaw 4227 at 1011 Quadling Avenue. Recommendation is to give first reading to City of Coquitlam zoning amendment bylaw 4227 and refer this bylaw to public hearing.
Moved by Councillor McDonnell, seconded by Councillor Reamer. Councillor Lynch.
I just wanted to say that we're going to some narrow lots in this neighborhood. It's not consistent with the rest of it. I'd like to hear what the neighbors have to say, so I'm going to be moving forward on it. But I think every time we initially break into these smaller, narrower lots, when we have an established area like this, we're going to have some residents who are not comfortable with that. And but I would like to hear what they have to say.
Thank you. Councillor Robinson.
Thank you. Ditto on that. And one of the things that struck me, because this item and the following item, I think run some risk of neighbors' trees, and want to know, and as we move forward, and I'm prepared to move these forward to public hearing, but want to have some sort of discussion, or at least at the committee level, about what policies or practices that we have in place to ensure that as we go to narrower and narrower lots and do more infill projects, that these kinds of things are going to become a little bit more contentious, and I want to make sure that we mitigate any unintended challenges to neighboring trees. So if staff could just take note that I think we're going to have to address that at some point. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Reid.
Thank you. Through to Mr. McIntyre, we addressed this about a month or two ago. And is there any update on it? Because it's becoming increasingly more important, as other members of council have said.
Mr. McIntyre.
Thank you, Worship. And through the chair, to respond to actually both councillors, Reid and Robinson. Yes, there was at the town hall meeting, was it 2 months ago up at Poirier, we recall there was some speakers to this, and I think it's quite true that particularly with some of these infill situations in the southwest, the tolerances are just that much tighter in terms of on-site construction and potential impacts on the construction property relative to the neighboring lots. And I think at a time, as I mentioned, one of the takeaways for me is that we need to maybe do a better job of informing and educating building permit applicants and those developer contractors when they are going with these infill sort of situations, to be more aware of not only just on their property but neighboring properties. So we've prepared, it's still in draft form. We'll try to get this wrapped up very soon and bring it through committee. Sort of a user-friendly guide to sort of the do's and don'ts of sensitive infill development and construction. And so we're hoping that through that process of informing and educating building permit applicants, we'll get a little better reaction out there on these situations.
Okay, and have we also addressed the fact, like it happened not in this neighborhood, but in another neighborhood, where someone nicely went in and took all the trees down and then came in and made their application? Because if I find out that's happening, I would like you to look through legal. And if they're going to start playing games like that, then as far as I'm concerned, they won't be allowed to develop or receive any kind of a permit for 5 to 10 years on that property. And I'd like to know if we can do that.
Your Worship, we'll take that away and have a look at it. In those situations, if they're coming back for either rezoning or development permit or subdivision approval, if there's been those sort of unwise premature moves, I think that'll have consequences on that. But we'll have a look at that as well.
Well, there has to be consequences, because some of our neighboring municipalities are going through somewhat the same thing, because everybody's densifying now. And I'd like to instead of just slapping wrists, I'd like to do a bit more, which I probably couldn't repeat right now. But I would really like to know if legal says there's anything that we can do about prohibiting, if they start doing this that's in obvious contravention of our tree bylaw and anything else, then I'm just not prepared to give them a building permit for a long, long time. Thank you.
And myself, I'd like to weigh in a little bit in that I'd love to see us develop the kind of policy that would allow the flexibility both to shift the proposed home to the front yard setback or to the rear yard setback, to allow flexibility to get around those tree root protection issues so that we can retain more trees. Particularly as we try to infill. Everyone's got to try to do this infill. We've drawn a hard-line barrier, an urban containment boundary around the Lower Mainland, and as we densify those neighborhoods, we'll make them more amenable to public transit and all kinds of more sustainable types of dwellings rather than just the quarter-acre density that we have developed traditionally. But in doing that, I hate to see us lose the tree cover because we weren't willing to be more flexible, and I'd love to see us develop that flexibility. So I'll vote in favor of moving this on to public hearing. Any other discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously.
Item 5.3 is a report on application for zoning amendment bylaw 4212, and this is for 2810 Glen Drive. The recommendation is to give first reading to see if Coquitlam zoning amendment bylaw 4212 and refer it to public hearing.
Move the recommendation.
Moved by Councillor Segura, second by Councillor Reamer. Councillor Lynch.
Thank you. And I have a similar concern about this, noting that the variance is, basically 10 feet. It talks in the report about some cul-de-sac properties having less frontage than the 9.7 meters, but from what I read on the map here, it appears that they don't really front anywhere near these properties are. So while I can understand the comparison, they don't directly relate. Is there any properties that are closer to the ones that are being subdivided, specifically the one that's having the significant variance of, I guess it's like 25% in that neighborhood that would make this fit in better, or is this going to be quite unusual?
Mr. McIntyre.
Thank you, Worship. No, I think in the report it notes that in the general area, so it's a little bit distant. There's the narrower lot frontages. So it's the properties to the east and to the south. There are existing lots with slightly narrower frontages than the subject property. So I guess it would be a matter to see what the reaction response would be in the neighborhood, if they feel this would be in keeping with the character of that neighborhood, to go with those narrower lot widths or not.
Okay, thank you. If it wasn't for the existing house on the property, I don't know that I could entertain this. I'm actually not expecting to get a lot of favorable response on this, but I'd like to move it on to public hearing.
Okay, Councillor Reid.
Yes, thank you. Mr. McIntyre, at committee, I have difficulties with this one as well because of the street that it's on and how busy it is, and the two lots are going to be close together and the access and egress to the properties. Did the applicants have a traffic report at all?
Mr. McIntyre.
Your Worship, I don't believe so, but we will check on that and have that information
have it brought at the
as part of the public hearing.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Seeing no other discussion. Motion is first reading. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously.
Item 5.4 is a preliminary zoning report for Easton. It's a 4-story apartment building at 615, 617, 621 Smith Avenue. This is bylaw 4230. Recommendation is to give first reading to see if Coquitlam zoning amendment bylaw 4230 and refer it to public hearing.
Moved by Councillor Reamer, second by Councillor McDonnell. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously.
Item 5.5 is a preliminary report on an application for a zoning text amendment bylaw 4231 and the Tri-Cities Cold Wet Weather MAT Program Housing Agreement bylaw 4232. The multi-part recommendation is to give first reading to see if Coquitlam zoning amendment bylaw 4231, refer this bylaw to public hearing, and that council give first, second, and third readings to housing agreement bylaw 4232.
Moved by Councillor Sikora, second by Councillor Robinson. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously.
Item 5.6 is a development permit authorization for a 5-unit street-oriented village home residential development at 1395 Marguerite Street. Recommendations to approve the signing and sealing of the development permit and that the mayor and city clerk be authorized to execute it.
Second.
Moved by Councillor Reid, seconded by Councillor Reamer. Councillor Asmussen.
Once again, the same comments I will make as that committee is that we've created a variance for all aspects of this zone. We have an increased lot coverage, we have a decreased front yard setback, a decreased exterior yard setback, an interior yard setback, decreased accessory off-street parking, and a decreased minimum separation between house and garage. We're not closely following the zone. I don't mind having variances, a couple variances here and there to make something fit in, but we are changing every setback and every variance in every side of this zone. So we're not really following the zone, we're creating a special zone. And so the person, when you purchase the property, know what the zone was, what was to go in there, and I think it was made at committee by Councillor Nicholson as it's 5, maybe 4, but to make it fit without variances, and I think that was a good point. So at this, I can't support this moving forward with this many variances. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Nicholson.
Thank you, Your Worship. I have to thank Councillor Asmussen for reminding me what I said, and I still feel the same way. I actually have a different question that I didn't ask at the committee level. In the report, it says, to develop meaningful private outdoor space and reduce the amount of hard surface associated with detached garages, siting and setback variances will be required. I am hard-pressed to figure out in my mind how reducing the setbacks reduce the amount of hard surface associated or improve or provide meaningful private outdoor space. The amount of space not covered by the building and the garage is smaller in proportion when the variances are taken into account. And so I don't follow the logic that says the hard surface associated with garages is reduced when the setbacks are varied.
That not shorten the driveway. Mr. McIntyre.
Councillor McIntyre.
He doesn't want the job. I thought it was a demotion. Go ahead, Mr. McIntyre.
Thank you, Your Worship. I've got the utmost respect for council, but I don't want to be a councillor. So. On this one, it may be the wording is it could have been a little better worded, but I think what they're getting at there is the setback reductions are basically to push the buildings out further to the edges of the property and thereby create a larger backyard area, if you will, between the main units and the garage. And so it's creating that more open, usable yard space for the residents by pushing everything out a little bit.
By taking a large piece of the front yard and putting it in the backyard, in effect.
There is a reduction.
But in fact, the hard surface on the site as a percentage of the site is greater than it would have been had the variances not been there. So water absorption, all that other good stuff.
Your Worship, that is correct. The lot coverage maximum is requested to go from 45% to 49.1%.
Okay, and as I said a week ago, I won't be supporting this at this configuration. Thank you.
Thank you very much. No other speakers? Motion is first reading and public hearing. All in favor? Opposed? Councillor Nicholson is opposed. And Councillor Asmussen is opposed. Motion carries.
Item 6 is the minutes of the Recreation, Sports and Culture Standing Committee meeting of Monday, June 27th. Recommendations to receive those minutes.
Moved by Councillor Lynch, seconded by Councillor Nicholson. Councillor McDonnell.
Thank you. At committee, there were a couple of questions that came up, and I note that Mr. Englund is present tonight, and I'm hoping he's got answers to the questions that were raised. First question was he was asked to clarify the number of tree cutting permits that have been issued in the last year? Do you have that?
Mr. England, could you please step up to a microphone? The fire chief is abandoning his seat.
Your Worship, so the question was, I believe at the committee meeting was how many trees were cut down per year, I believe was the question.
Not trees, how many trees were cut down, how many permits did we issue?
How many permits did we issue? I don't have the number of tree cutting permits issued with me now, so we'll have to get back to you with that information.
Okay. And the other question was for the annual tree maintenance operating budget, so which includes, of course, Parks and Rec and engineering, the entire city budget. Do you have that?
Yes, there's a slide that I prepared that I'm not... Okay, sure.
No. Do you have a printout of it? I can put it on the overhead. Make it faster.
We have the technology.
Right. Almost as clear as the computer screen. So that's a summary of it, as simple and simplistic as it can be in terms of our tree maintenance cost. So you see there's a column there for the capital costs when these trees are planted. So the average or the annual capital cost is a total, and then the maintenance costs broken down per tree for those different types of trees, and then the total annual maintenance costs. So you can see essentially there's sort of a hierarchy of trees. There's the street trees that are developers plant that the city maintains, and then there are ornamental park trees that are installed in existing parks or in new parks. And then there are trees that are planted as part of community planting events, and those are typically small potted trees that are planted to restore or create new habitat. And then there's a couple of other rows there that sort of outline what it costs on an annual basis to do tree risk assessment and mitigation on city property, both in parks and in road allowance. So that's the summary.
Thank you. I appreciate this graph. The total maintenance budget, is it all under one item, or when we're looking it up at budget time, do we find parts of this budget in engineering and parts in Parks and Rec?
It's everything that's on the screen now is in the Parks, Rec, and Culture budget until I think this is the first year that some of those costs related to trees on engineering road allowance were covered in an engineering budget, but that's been sort of cleaned up in terms of where the money is. So there are multiple GL accounts that...
So just to stop right there, Mr.
Yep.
England.
Okay.
So those trees there from engineering will now come under Parks and Rec?
In terms of delivering the service around the basic service of tree hazard assessment and mitigation, that's the scope of it that is within the Parks, Rec, and Culture budget as outlined here.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And you'll get back to us on how many tree cutting permits were issued last year?
Absolutely.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Okay. Councillor Reamer.
Thank you.
Oh, I bet you it was on the same one, sorry. If we put the slide back up. Okay.
Thank you. With respect to the assessment of trees, how often do you scope things out? And for instance, do you do a certain set of trees at a certain location once a year, or how does that work?
Your Worship, for the most part, our tree hazard assessment is done on what we sort of refer to as a demand basis. So people calling in, internal staff calling in requests, and we get about We're up to 800 or 900 of those a year. We do have a small subset of sites that have forest health issues that we go to once a year to assess.
Okay.
But that's down to about 40 or 50 sites.
So you would get a report in from your parks crew possibly if they're out doing their work and whatever, and they happen to notice something.
Yeah, for the most part, though, it's residents that are calling in
Okay,
concerned
yeah.
about the trees behind their property.
Yeah.
That's the common
Okay.
request.
Thank you.
Okay. I think we're done now.
All right.
Thank you very much. Seeing no other speakers. Okay. Questions before us? All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously.
Item of business arising out of that committee's meeting concerns recreation program refund policy. The recommendation is that council approve the recreation program refund policy.
Moved by Councillor McDonnell, second by Councillor Nicholson. Discussion, all in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously.
Item 7 is the minutes of the Engineering, Utilities, and Environment Standing Committee meeting of Monday, June 27th. Recommendations to receive those minutes.
Moved by Councillor Asmundson, second by Councillor Reamer. All in favor? Opposed? Carried.
Item 7.3 is the planned closure of King Edward Street. The recommendation is that council write to TransLink regarding the reduction in service levels in the United Boulevard area during the current construction period.
Moved by Councillor Asmundson, second by Councillor Sikora. Councillor Nicholson.
Thank you, Your Worship. This recommendation was the result of lengthy discussion amongst all of us, and it occurred to me only as I read it. That it says, during the current construction period. That's certainly important. But I wonder whether we might include in the letter a reference to the fact that we consider the service levels prior to the current construction period to not have been adequate anyway. We'd like to see improvement in them, rather than simply restoration during the construction period to the old inadequate level. I asked you to tweak the letter.
Well, I believe, as I understood the motion and the letter that I had intended that we'd be sending out over my signature was that this is the time to increase service, not decrease it, because we're trying to reduce the number of cars because we've reduced the access to the
Keep it
place.
that way.
And that's the intent, obviously, to look for an augmentation of the service rather than a reduction, or in this case, almost elimination of the service.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Robinson.
Thank you.
Oops.
Thank you. As part of that discussion, there was some concern about the communications plan for how do we communicate with the businesses down there, and I'm just wanting to know if we can just get an update. This was one of the issues that came up, and if we can get an update about the status of a communications plan for those businesses around, you know, what they can do operationally so that they have all the information they need. Has that been done? If it hasn't, when can they get it?
Mr. McDonald.
Yes, actually, this afternoon, Council received an update of the information that we have prepared, and it outlines in that report all of the different deliverables that will go ahead. As a matter of fact, it started last week, and throughout the process, there's going to be a large number of deliverables, and anything that crops up that requires new or additional information, we're standing ready to get it done. That includes weekly meetings with various people involved in the construction of the project, and also a very clear message to the people doing the construction that if there are going to be any changes of an immediate nature, we need to know them immediately. And I have expressed that in every meeting we've had since January, because the real challenges that we've had is that something happens of an immediate sense, and we're left hanging, and we're not quite sure what's going on. So I've stated that both verbally, and I've written various documents to point out that we need an action-based system where if somebody changes the construction schedule or somebody does something that's not on the plan, we need to know that. Right. Because in the past, let's just say the base communication has been pretty solid, but it's the days when something untoward happens for some reason. We've had to be very proactive in trying to find out that information rather than having it supplied. So I think in most of council will have an email now from my staff that outlines the various specifics that are happening now and in the future.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Sikora.
Thank you very much. I think that also, that they've cut the service, but also I think now we should get the service back. We should get the service while it's closed, and also the service after, it's completed. Because once the service has been cut, sometimes it's pretty hard to get it back to a level where it was before. We tend to ignore it, and I don't know whether it's a fact or not, but it'll take a little while to restore it. So I think they ought to be notified, Tom, that we hope that after everything is put in place, that the service is resumed back to where it was.
Except if we're successful at having the service increased in the interim, in which case we want it kept the way it is then. Okay. Councillor Asmussen.
Well, thank you very much. The other issue that we're dealing with down here is the service levels, but also the reduction in the routing that is presently taking place. The bus now is, when the detour is at Brigant and United Boulevard, it's not going all the way down to King Edward. So we've got over a kilometre of area that is not being serviced, especially winners. Cher down that area have been sort of orphaned out of the area, especially Cher, who came to our committee meeting explaining the difficulties of the clients that they have that use transit exclusively and have been impacted greatly. The other issue we have is that the closure of King Edward is not scheduled until August 6th. But on June 13th, Transit instituted the detour and took the service off and have people running on the shuttles, which has been making it inconvenient and more difficult. And so rather than being a 3-month closure and a detour, we're now up to 4.5 months for those businesses down there, which is a greater impact. And the reason I've heard from Coast Mountain was explaining from Mr. McDonald is that while they could live with the closures at 5 a.m., when they hit the 6 a.m. staying until the closure, it affects the service in that area and greatly impacts them. They weren't getting consistent messaging from Kiewit on those timing closures, so that's why they decided to put it in. I would like us to go back to Coast Mountain Transit and ask them to reinstate until the closure the full service in that area, and to get Kiewit to commit to a consistent 5 a.m. over from the nighttime to the morning 5 a.m. On that part. But it is an extensive impact in that area down there, and I think we are trying to do everything we can to help mitigate that. But we need help, and we need TransLink, I think, to step up in a better way, just like they did in the Pitt River Bridge, and help make this work for our transit users. Thank you.
Thank you. The motion is the letter. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously.
Item 7.4 pertains to Metro Vancouver's draft Integrated Air Quality and Greenhouse Gas Management Plan. Recommendation from the committee is that Council defer Coquitlam's endorsement of the plan until such time as the plan has been updated, and to authorize the Mayor to send the attached letter to the Chair of the Metro Vancouver Board.
Moved by Councillor Reamer, second by Councillor Asmussen. No speakers. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously.
Item 7.5 pertains to the draft Metro Vancouver Drinking Water Management Plan. The Standing Committee's recommendation is to receive the working draft of the plan and to request Metro Vancouver to do what's listed here, A, B, C, and D. And 3, direct staff to forward a copy of the report to the GVWD Board and to the Mayor and Council of other regional member municipalities.
Moved by Councillor Asmussen, second by Councillor Nicholson. Councillor McDonnell.
Thank you. I have a question for Mr. Suzak. We're spending a lot of time, and have been as council, and we will be in the next little while, about the drinking water management plan and the delivery of the water. Are there any plans at Metro Vancouver to, are they talking about when they might want to increase the pipe size, the transmission of the water? I know that this is just kind of skims the corner of this actual report, but you know, Surrey's growing, Coquitlam's growing, Burnaby's growing. There's more and more demand on the water supply, but the transmission of it doesn't seem to be being addressed. Are there plans for to make the pipes bigger? Replace them?
Sure, thank you. Through your worship,
Mr.
yes,
Suzak, go ahead.
we have asked Metro Vancouver staff to be prepared to discuss that exact issue. When they come here, we have asked that their staff, subsequent to the next Water Committee meeting, which is on, I think, July 13th or thereabouts, I'm not sure of the exact date, but we have asked them to come to either council or committee and to have a chat about water utility planning, as well as the strategy for lawn sprinkling. They're intimately tied, and given that it is very expensive to expand the water system, one of the management strategies is the new water sprinkling regulations, but we think we'd be all better off to understand the state of their utility planning. We've asked them to come here and have that chat.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you. Councillor Nicholson.
Thank you, Your Worship. I want to take this opportunity to compliment staff. The recommendations that will go to Metro Vancouver are remarkably specific and clear, and should bring about no confusion on the part of the recipients, be able to be dealt with expeditiously. I appreciate that. Thank you.
I agree they're clear. I disagree that they will cause no confusion. The motion is our response to Metro. Any further discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously.
Next item, item 7.7.3, concerns the cosmetic pesticide ban. The Senate Committee's recommendation is to direct staff to draft a pesticide use control bylaw, to include a notification process for the use of pesticides, to implement a transformative public education and outreach program, and to implement a graduated compliance strategy.
Moved by Councillor Robinson, second by Councillor Nicholson. Councillor Reid.
Well, it's here. And I have to say I'm extremely pleased with the committee. We did ask the chair of the committee, Councillor Reamer, if there was good debate on this matter, because that's what really mattered to me, is the fact that there was debate for and against putting the pesticide ban in, and all the reasons for both sides. And I think they've done a really good job. I feel really confident that it was debated in a brand new committee full of experts, people that really understand this issue, because this is a really important issue. So I'll be pleased to support it this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Robinson.
Yes, it is here, Councillor Reid, and it took us 2 years to get here, and I'm thrilled that we are here. It's a far cry from where we came from, when we couldn't even get a community dialogue. So I'm pleased that persistence it does pay off. And there were a lot of folks who got us here. There was the Coquitlam Pesticide Awareness Coalition, the Canadian Cancer Society, finally the Environmental and Sustainability Advisory Committee, who I do think did an outstanding job, and it was chaired, I understand, very, very well, ensuring that there was some good dialogue. And finally, the Standing Committee brought it forward here to Council. I am going to support it because I think this is a move in the right direction, but I would like us to also consider writing a letter to Minister Terry Lake advising this ministry, the provincial ministry, that we're another municipality that's added our name to a growing list, and that we need to urge the provincial government to ban the sale of these products. It would help us address the challenges with enforcement and education and implementation of this ban. And I would like to see this council go forward and ask the provincial government to stop, to act on the research they've been doing for 3 years and to actually put that into action.
Thank you. Councillor Reamer.
Thank you. I too am happy to be able to support this and to vote on my committee's recommendation. It was an excellent process that we went through. We had 3 meetings to get this done, and I'm very pleased that we were able to meet the June 30th deadline, or at least the initial report to engineering met that deadline. We had some excellent debate on each of these issues. We didn't reinvent the wheel, but we made the wheel better. And I think if there's any other municipalities out there that are going down this route, I think that our bylaw will be one that shows a really good example. So I'm very happy to support this, and I look forward to the educational component. I think that's a very important and key to this particular recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Sikora.
Yeah, thank you very much. When will this bylaw come forward? Is this going to be in a draft form of bylaw?
Through your worship, I would anticipate sometime in the fall.
Okay, sometime this fall. Okay, the one thing I'd like to know, if anybody can answer, we were talking about penalties, progressive penalties. What do you mean by progressive penalties? What is it going to, before I vote on this bylaw, I'd like to know, what are the penalties? What kind of progressive? Where is it going to start and where is it going to end?
Well, we don't have a bylaw in front of us yet, and I assume we don't have the penalties yet. Mr. Suzak.
No, those details have not been discussed with legal, your worship. We would have to address those both in the covering staff report and within the bylaw.
Secondly, how are you going to enforce it? How, when the bylaw comes forward, what is going to be in the bylaw as far as enforcement is concerned?
Mr. Suzak.
How are you going to enforce it?
Yes, your worship, as with any bylaw, bylaws for the municipalities are generally enforced on a complaint basis. We will be seeking to address the issue substantively with public education, with consult, with people who might continue to be using these products. As a last resort, we would be undertaking in some kind of enforcement action, but that is why we have a bylaw staff, and we would ultimately pursue some kind of bylaw action if we had to in the end.
Well, I'm going to support this for the time being, but when the bylaw comes forward, I may have some difficulty because, number one, I think it's a provincial jurisdiction, and I think the provincial government ought to ban the sale of the product in our city. We can ban it, can we?
Mr. Suzak.
Thank you, your worship. The municipality may not ban sale, but it can address use and application, and that is what we are doing with this bylaw.
So a person can go to a store, buy a product that is pesticide that should not be used, and uses it on his garden or his shrubbery. How are you going to police that? I'd hope it wasn't one of those things that you send a bylaw enforcement officer to take some samples off his soil in his yard, that's a private yard, to see what kind of pesticide he was using.
Mr. Suzak.
Your worship, just a comment. Our hope is that we will experience, we will have similar experiences to other municipalities where really enforcement was not an issue, and there was a change in the local residential population behavior toward the use of these products. We're anticipating that we would have a very similar response. However, with the bylaw, there is a need to have some sort of an enforcement provision, and that's why it would be there.
So you're hoping that, in fact, our residents behave themselves in a manner to where they police themselves.
No, your worship, that's been the common experience thus far in lower mainland municipalities.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Nicholson.
Thank you, Your Worship. A couple of speakers back, I think I heard Councillor Robinson effectively asking to amend this to include correspondence with the provincial government, first to communicate the fact of this decision, and second to ask the provincial government to move expeditiously towards realizing their 3 years of work and implementing a ban on the sale of pesticides. Assuming that I heard that correctly from Councillor Robinson, I would second that amendment. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to continue with the speaking order on the, I don't think this significantly changes the motion. I'm going to continue with the speaking order on the main motion, and we'll entertain the motion to amend in a moment. Councillor McDonnell.
Thank you. I'm going to vote for this going forward. I actually read in the paper today two consequences that happen in the rest of Canada, which I hope happens here. And one of them, according to the Ministry of Environment Ontario, herbicide concentrations in some of their streams dropped by as much as 97%. And in Halifax, in the 5 years following their implementation of the ban, the number of landscaping and lawn care firms in the city grew by 53%, according to Statistics Canada. So those would be some nice consequences that could happen here.
Thank you. I too will support it. We did ask a committee to do this work. The committee did its work. I think it did its work diligently and in a way that is beyond reproach. We came up with, I think, a very good and supportable bylaw, or at least supportable terms for a bylaw. We'll work out the language as we move forward from here. But as I said right at the outset, and as we've said all along, this is a jurisdiction that belongs to the province because they have the tools to do it. They're the only ones that can ban the sale of the product and make it so that we don't have to go to great lengths to enforce it. I don't think we have to go to great lengths to enforce it because I don't think we can. I don't think in the end that if someone wants to surreptitiously put weed and feed in their lawn, there's probably nothing we can do about it. I suspect that most people will try to obey the law and try to find other means of achieving their weed-free lawn, or they will simply accept that weeds are a perfectly normal part of lawn. But until the province actually bans the product, there isn't a way to enforce it legitimately or efficiently. And so we look to the province, and so I will support the amendment as well. I've always said that this is a provincial jurisdiction, and we should be encouraging the province to step forward and identify those products that need to be banned and ban them. Councillor Asmussen.
Well, thank you. I'll support this. I think the chair of the committee did a good job. I support moving this off to the Environment Committee to take a look at this. My issue always has been that this is a federal provincial responsibility, and they should be the ones dealing with this. The federal government's responsible for product safety. That's a federal funded responsibility. And we have a problem at all times with our 8% of the tax dollars that we get, and how far do we go stepping into the area of product safety at the federal government level or the provincial government level. I don't see that as our role. But this has gone to committee, it's come back, they've done a lot of work. I will support this moving forward. I'll support the amendment because I think that's where we should be going with these type of decisions or problems, is saying to the federal government or the provincial government, step up, do the necessary research, and ban it on a provincial or federal level. That's their responsibility. And as Councillor Robinson, I think, was in her tone, was suggesting that they've been dragging their feet maybe in doing this, and maybe they have. I don't know, but I think that's the proper place to do it, not the municipal level, because a hodgepodge of different types of regulations, and I think, as has been said, the sale of it's not banned. But we're moving forward with this. I think we've done a good job with what we've had. The committee did a very good job going through this, and we will move this forward, that a bylaw be created, and we'll come back in the fall and we'll move forward on this. Thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Lynch.
Thank you. Well, I'm going to support this, moving this forward to bring back a draft pesticide use control bylaw. I had two questions really at this point. There seems to be 7 exclusions it does not apply to, and I'm wondering if that is significantly more than some of the other draft bylaw or actually bylaws that have been put in place in other municipalities that were considered. That's my first question.
Mr. Suzanne.
Sure, Your Worship. The exclusions in paragraph A reflect the exclusions in provincial regulation or community charter. This is just simply consistency with provincial regulation.
Okay, and my other question was, and it didn't jump out at me until I was just reading it again, when we're talking about in A, talks about prohibits the use on private residential lands and public lands, but it doesn't mention anything about businesses or commercial properties, and I'm wondering how we cover things like the landscaping for restaurants or in front of the public buildings that we have in our city.
Mr. Souza.
Yes, Your Worship, this is a bylaw that applies to residential land. It does not apply to commercial premises. That's the basis of the bylaw.
So that was a deliberate exclusion?
I would have to check, but I believe that is consistent with the community charter.
I'm actually going to refer to Councillor Reamer because I believe this actually is a community charter. Community charter gives us permission to regulate pesticide use on residential land, but not on commercial land. Is that
You're correct, Mayor Stewart. It is a community charter issue.
Okay, so that kind of begs the question then, are we planning on going forward with just educational programs and for businesses? Because obviously if we want this to be for our city and we want to reduce the use of pesticides and et cetera, then we're going to want to influence our businesses as well.
Mr. Suzak?
Yes, Your Worship, it would obviously not be material to the bylaw, but it would be material to the staff report. We have to put our minds together as staff and think through that issue. And one of the topics of the staff report is what will be the communication strategy, how will we work with the business sector to get them to think about this issue and go along with what we're doing on a regulatory basis with the commercial residential sector.
Okay, and since you're allowing some debate on the amendment, I just wondered, my query has to do, and I'm fully in support of sending a letter, but I'm wondering if it's a little premature, being as this is a recommendation for staff to bring back a draft bylaw that we haven't passed yet. Are we going to word it that way, or are we going to wait until we actually have a bylaw that we've passed before we start to tell the provincial government and other municipalities that we've enacted a bylaw?
I had intended that the letter would say something like, at last night's council meeting, council decided to enact a bylaw to regulate the use of pesticides, and we are looking to the province to show leadership in the action that it had envisioned over the last 3 years through its public input process on the banning of the sale of pesticide, cosmetic pesticides in the province.
But we aren't really enacting the bylaw tonight, though. We're asking staff.
Yeah. Tonight we are determining that we are intending to enact the bylaw. The motion is to essentially to direct staff to draft the pesticide control bylaw.
So it's a draft. It's coming back, so it's got to be passed. Thank you.
Okay. Well, I think it would be appropriate that we send the letter now rather than waiting until the bylaw comes back to us. And it seems like a needless wait. Okay. I'm going to call any further debate on the amendment. The amendment is to draft a letter to the province informing them and urging them. All in favor of the amendment? All opposed? Motion carries unanimously. The motion as amended, which is to all of the staff report plus drafting a letter. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously.
Thank you, Your Worship. The next item concerns the Northeast Sector Transfer Station service continuity. The recommendation is that respective municipal councils in the Northeast Sector forwarded joint letters to both Metro Vancouver and the province expressing their concerns regarding the state of planning for a replacement transfer station once the Coquitlam transfer station closes down.
Moved by Councillor Asmussen, seconded by Councillor Reamer. Councillor Sikora.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's unfortunate that, we're losing our transfer station that's been very handy for our residents in our community, but also that we'll be looking in our budget to at least for $500,000 of a loss on the transfer station that we get from tipping fees. So it's unfortunate that we did not work with Metro Vancouver to see whether we could put another piece of property in Coquitlam elsewhere to have a transfer station. But it's one of those things that are going to be costly to the taxpayers again.
Thank you, Councillor Sikora. I will report that, of course, the matter sits with the provincial government. The solid waste management plan has been before the Ministry of the Environment for quite some time now for a decision. With that decision would come the decision as to all kinds of things related to transfer station among the possible choices are the continued use of a landfill in the interior.
You're debating.
I'm sorry?
You're starting to debate. The Ballot, you should step down from the chair. You're going to debate it.
Councillor Sikora.
You're debating.
Councillor Sikora, I'm simply commenting on, I'm offering my comments as you did yours.
You can also debate.
That's what this is, yes, and I will continue. So the various options are continued landfill, which would require a transfer station, preferably in Coquitlam, and that's certainly an option still. But it's also a number of other options, and one of the options put forward by Metro Vancouver is an incinerator, either in the region or outside of the region, and neither of those options would require a transfer station. So our challenge is that Metro Vancouver doesn't yet, before it gets the answer from the ministry, doesn't know whether in fact we're going to be needing a transfer station in the region or not. And so that's going to be at least the short-term challenge, the short-term hurdle as to what happens with the solid waste management plan that's now before the province for approval. So I will support this. Anybody else? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed? Carried.
Moving on to reports of staff. Item 8 concerns the fleet cyclical review. The staff recommendation is to direct staff to continue implementation of the recommendations in priority order, approve the updating of the vehicle life cycle and inflation estimates for the 2012 base budget, amend the city's snow and ice policy, approve the following one-time transfers listed here. Direct staff to commence a fuel system strategy review in 2011 and direct staff to apply the principles of assessing needs and sustainability and utilizing the vehicle replacement reserve fund only for replacement vehicles and equipment.
Moved by Councillor Asmussen, second by Councillor Reamer. Councillor Sikora.
Yeah, thank you very much. Here's another one that, we're taking $1 million from the infrastructure reserve to prop up the vehicle that we, I guess, failed to do so over a period of years to see that there was enough money in the budget for a vehicle replacement. So again, was the budget carved out the way it should have been? No, it wasn't, because here's one spot where we're transferring X amount of dollars where we didn't budget for. Secondly, our sewer and water, certainly the residents have been complaining about the amount of money that they're paying for sewer and water, and yet we're building enough reserves in there to be able to strip it for $750,000, and I think it's wrong. I think that money belongs to the residents, and why increase the water and sewer by $750,000 if you really didn't need it? That should go back to the residents. So it really bothers me to no end. So I'll not be supporting it.
Thank you. Councillor Nicholson.
Thank you, Your Worship. I have an amendment. At 4, we ask for 3 transfers. The $1 million from the city's infrastructure reserve was decided by this council at an earlier meeting. And we talked about dealing with the surplus, and I would amend to remove that line, and I've discussed that with staff previously.
Okay. Any implications from staff? Okay. So that line is redundant and is removed. All in favor of that amendment? Opposed? Oh, Councillor Asmussen, go ahead.
I'm quite concerned about making a withdrawal when we had staff, and Mr. Nichols, we had no bearing of the discussion you had with staff as to why we're going to withdraw the $1 million from the infrastructure into this fund. Is that what you're...
It's already done.
Okay. Yes, we did. Yeah. So, okay. So you're not... I'm just trying to get clarity on what you're...
Don't want to authorize it.
Okay. That's all we're doing. I just want to make sure. Okay.
Okay. The motion was carried with Councillor Sikora opposed to the amendment. The motion as amended. Councillor Nicholson, you were completing, or?
Sure. On the motion as amended, at point 3, we say amend the city's snow and ice policy to include an annual transfer of funds accumulated in excess of $2 million in the snow and ice reserve to the vehicle replacement reserve until such time as the vehicle reserve is appropriately funded. And the little note I wrote in the margin says, and then, if we hit 2, when we implicit in that recommendation is that $2 million is an appropriate ceiling for the snow and ice reserve fund. And I'd like to confirm that I'm reading that appropriately. So can staff tell me, is that the feeling?
Can you explain your recommendation, Mr. Suzak?
Yes, Your Worship. At the staff level, we feel that a $2 million reserve for snow and ice is appropriate. That would be an amount in addition to the annual snow and ice control operating budget of around 1.5 million. And we feel that at that level, we have the resources to do the extras that some of our citizens were looking for in the winter of '08.
Thank you. So my assumption then would be that in some future year, when the vehicle replacement reserve has become fully funded, should we have a light snow and ice year, we would have some room in that budget to recover over in a coming year. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Sikora, again, this one's on the motion as amended.
Number one, one thing that, again, our budgeting, you're going to have, let's say, $2 million of snow removal, and you're not using it. That should be frozen. That should be frozen. I don't think for 1 minute that you should be always putting money in and then transferring it from snow removal to somewhere else. Until that $2 million is, or some of it is depleted, then you build it up to $2 million again. You don't keep building it, and transferring it to somewhere else. That's not budgeting as far as I'm concerned. So I cannot support it.
Okay.
And I thank Council for not referring to freezing the snow and ice budget. Okay. Councillor Asmussen.
Well, thank you very much. I want to thank staff for a very good report on a problem that was identified through the cyclical review of the underfunding. That has been a long-term issue, I think, going back 25 years. And it has multiple factors, as in the report stating, and the problem that we've had for a long time about overextending the life of our vehicles that has gotten us into this problem. And I think it's very prudent today that we tackle this problem for the taxpayers of tomorrow to make sure that we have the proper equipment and the replacement of these equipment in a fund moving forward. And so I just want to thank staff for a job well done on this report, and I'll be supporting it. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no other speakers. Motion is the staff recommendation as amended to remove the $1 million, which is redundant. All in favor? Opposed? Councillor Sikora is opposed. Motion carries.
Thank you. Item 9 concerns a Public Works cyclical review update. The recommendations the Council receive the report for information.
Second.
Moved by Councillor Lynch, second by Councillor Robinson. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously.
Item 10 concerns the build-out of the Coquitlam City Centre Library. The recommendations the Council receive this report for information.
Moved by Councillor Reamer, second by Councillor Robinson. No discussion. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously.
Item 11 concerns a public opinion question on the ballot for the 2011 general local election. This is an issue that Council referred to this meeting from its last meeting on June 20th, and it pertains to the question of whether or not the City of Coquitlam should elect representatives to the Metro Vancouver Board.
Any discussion? Do you have anything, Councillor Sikora?
It's on the floor. I'd like to hear some of the debate, council members.
Well, normally we allow the council member that moved it
I
to...
realize that it's on the floor.
So you don't have anything to say? Okay, Councillor Nicholson?
In its ultimate fruition, I guess.
And it's the motion to refer, I believe, was by Councillor Nicholson. This was a motion by no? Okay. Councillor Reid.
I do not, as I spoke before when we put 2 weeks ago, I just do not think this is something that we should be dealing with, not only especially at this time, but I think this is something that should be discussed at Metro Vancouver. Every other city or municipality or village or town or whatever, we have a whole collection of them at Metro Vancouver at the board. This is something that should go down and be addressed at the board. And I do not believe that it's something that I want to take on. And I do not believe it's our place to take this on. So I won't be supporting this in any way.
Thank you. Councillor Sikora.
Thank you very much. I noticed that after I mentioned that the board should be elected, there's one newspaper item that went in the Tri-City News, grandstanding. It wasn't grandstanding whatsoever. The fact is that, years ago the board was elected. The GVD board, when Bill Bennett Sr. set up the GVD, they set up sewer and water, period. That was their whole job, of sewer and water. And the fact is that every board member was elected. And I know that the Coquitlam now has written it up just the way that was discussed here in the council chambers. And I thank him for it, for proper reporting. But however, here's the situation, that we have different members on the board that are not elected. So they're not responsible to anybody outside of themselves. The fact is that, when things are being come up in the board meetings, as one board member spent $59,000 for travel. $59,000 travel, 209 and 210. I wasn't on the board then, but I sure would have raised it. And one of the trips was, what do you think it was? Hawaii. And the fact is that, I wonder if he went there to see whether the pineapple juice and the vodka tasted like our water. That's, one thing. Now, the fact is also there's trips, look back, there's trips that are $6,500 for airfare, and then they decide to go first class, so they pay another $6,200 for airfare. Has it been raised? No, it hasn't been. But any board member, how they handle our money. And it's just, if you're one of those people that sit on the board and agree with everything that's going on, you'll get every kind of trip you want. You can go anywhere you want at taxpayers' expense. That's what it appears to me like. And I know that, we talk about accountability. Very, very simple. You go to the taxpayers in this community. What's wrong with having the taxpayers tell you whether you should be elected to the GVD board or Metro board or not? And the fact is, we every year seem to jockey here in the council chambers, or there's a lot of jockeying in the council chambers to see who's going to go on the board, GVD board, and different committees. This way, it would wipe that position out, where you wouldn't be jockeying for anything. The first two people of the highest votes by the taxpayers would go to the board, to the GVD board. Secondly, you could say, okay, the next two, to the top two, would be the people that would replace the top two if they can't make the meetings. So I think that would be very, very good. But however, I know that there was also a vote taken by CBC this morning after I spoke for a few minutes on CBC, and the fact is what I understand, there was a great number of people said, yes, our board should be elected. And you take even my notice of motion a year and a half ago about the Western Plateau Golf Course. I was lobbied like hell to withdraw that motion. Where would that golf course would have been? Nowhere. The taxpayers of Western Plateau around that golf course were screaming mad at what was happening. This RGS come aboard, and now we're fighting with Metro Vancouver and RGS when we should have been fighting it 2 years ago. 3 years ago, we should have been fighting it to begin with, instead of Johnny come lately. So with me, I have no problem. To me, I always said, when I sat on the board for 18 years before, and I sat there when we were elected and not elected, okay? And to me, I could care less if I ever go on a board, but I'll tell you what, these kind of shenanigans cannot go on in Metro Vancouver. We have to have people that are not just yes people. We have to have people that are going to represent our taxpayers and say this is wrong. I'd like to know, why are we condoning these kind of expenditures? We got a whole board that's about approximately $800 million budget, and none of them are elected. Not one of them is elected. And how many businessmen is there on that board? 2, 3, period. And that's what's happening. And it just, to me, it appears, since I've sat in there the last few months, like it's a friendship group in there, a bunch of yes people. And that's exactly what's happening. Nobody questions anything. Just rubber stamp, rubber stamp, rubber stamp, pick up your paycheck and away you go. Well, I noticed that some of those people are making more money from the GVD than they do as elected body in any municipality. That's what's happening. So it's like double dipping on a whole lot of things. So, I know I went last year a few times to the GVD, I didn't pick up the paycheck. You can look at my paycheck, you show a whole bunch of zeros. You show a whole bunch of zeros. And this year I'm on a board, and I'll tell you frankly, I think I should be elected. And I've said this 20 years ago on a board. I've said this about 25, 30 years ago, that you should be elected, and I still feel the same way. I've chastised the whole board at the GVD or Metro Vancouver about the way we sit on the board. And I'll always be saying that. But there's people that I get appointed to committee and everything. When a board is elected, then they're the ones that'll be chairing these committees and sitting on the committees. They'd have the 31 or 33 people that they could appoint to the different committees. Now they appoint all kinds of council members from other communities and our community sitting on different committees that are not even on the board. That's wrong. Very simple. I wouldn't say any more. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Lynch.
Okay, thank you. I find it unfortunate that we didn't have the opportunity to put this to the Strategic Priorities Committee, because I would prefer to have had an actual concrete resolution that we're passing. This is kind of generic. And there's two issues here. I think there's the one of whether or not people should be elected directly to Metro Vancouver or not, or the issue that I was more concerned about. We keep hearing around this council table that our residents aren't elected, or our residents aren't represented by somebody who's elected. And I personally don't agree with that. I think that we're all elected, and then one of us or two of us or four of us, depending on the meeting, end up going to represent the residents from the city at Metro Vancouver. The issue is do the residents have a say in who the representatives are? And that's why I don't have a lot of faith that we're going to massively change the way that happens all through Metro Vancouver for everybody being elected to the board, although I'm not sure that's a bad idea. But what I would like to see is I'd like to see a process at election time where the residents can actually specify who of the people who get elected to council would then move forward to be their representative at the Metro Vancouver region. And to me, that gives them some say in who the representatives are. People can't say they weren't elected by the residents of Coquitlam to represent them. And when you do get to Metro Vancouver, then I don't believe anybody who's sitting around this council is going to make a major decision that's going to be against the best interests of Coquitlam. I know that when you're at Metro Vancouver, you're a Metro Vancouver director. You have to vote in the best interest of the whole of Metro Vancouver, but I really don't believe that anybody is going to vote against the best interests of Coquitlam or anything that's going to be negatively impacted. So we didn't have a chance to really flush out what the question should be or how it should be worded on the ballot. But the issue that I think is important is to ask them whether, and I think they do, and I think it's too late now for us to put it on the ballot for this year's election, but I think it would be appropriate for the following election to have it on the ballot that said these people will be your Metro Vancouver representatives, providing they were elected to council as well. And I think that's democracy, and I think that's appropriate. And maybe if we go through the referendum process and that passes at this council level, maybe that will be a catalyst for Metro Vancouver to take a look and say, well, maybe we do need to consider. And I actually believe, and Mr. Mayor, you're probably more up on this than not, this would probably require the Metro Vancouver's legislative pattern to be changed, and that'd be a provincial government decision and stuff. It's a long process, but I think if we really believe that the people who are sitting in Metro Vancouver aren't elected, then the process has to change.
Thank you. Councillor Nicholson.
Thank you, Your Worship. Can I first of all get some clarity as to whether there is a motion on the floor, because I'm not clear on that.
I believe the motion by Councillor Secor was referred to this meeting for debate and discussion. Is that not the case? Okay, so the motion is, Mr. Gilbert will read out the motion.
The excerpt from the minutes reads that That council consider placing a public opinion question on the ballot for the 2011 general local election relative to whether or not City of Coquitlam representatives on the Metro Vancouver board should be elected.
So we're doing what we were directed, which is talk about it.
With permission of your worship, or through your worship, I think if this group decides that they would like to have a question or a similar question on the ballot, that we would refer the matter to the strategic priorities meeting of next week to flesh out the actual wording of a question. I don't think that I would recommend that take place on the floor on the fly.
Yes. So
well, I intend to call a question, though, that was raised. Should we have a question on the ballot? The wording of the question is a matter for strategic priorities.
That is correct. That's how I would interpret it.
Okay, and I'll speak against doing that. I don't think it's appropriate to put that kind of question on the ballot. I don't think it's appropriate for the City of Coquitlam to find some different way of selecting its representatives to the Metro Board than the other municipalities. I think they all have to come through a similar process. It may very well be that should be that they be elected rather than selected by the council. And it may be that they should be made up of council members, or it might be broader than that. There's lots of different possibilities, but I believe that it needs to be the same across the Metro governance structure, and that change to that could come from the Metro Board itself, could come through direction from the provincial government, or might perhaps be something lobbied for through the LMLGA. But I don't think Coquitlam making a decision on its own to elect its representatives is an appropriate way to move. So I won't be supporting this. Thank you.
Councillor Asmussen.
Well, thank you. I'm going to agree with some of the comments that Mr. Nicholson has just made. I think I want to go back into the history of Metro, and I think Councillor Sikora touched on it. Was originally the cities in the area came together to share costs on major infrastructure from sewer, water, and waste. And they did that moving together with representation from their councils. The other issue that has, and this is important for people to understand, may not, is that we, the cities of Metro Vancouver, guarantee the debt of Metro Vancouver. That's why you have a councillor from here going to Metro Vancouver to represent the city's interests. And I think people get confused when we say elected, and I think what Councillor Lynch was talking about, people think about directly elected, somebody that runs for the position of a Metro separate from council. We're not talking about that. What we're really talking about is asking the public to select a councillor off here to send to Metro from council. So, and I don't think that's the way to go, because when we do our elections, Metro's never a major issue in our elections, and will the public have the understanding or information to make a balanced decision? I mean, Mr. Lynch and Mr. Sikora are both at the top of the list the last couple of times. It will be to their advantage to be one of the people going forward in that case. But I also believe that when you have your Metro Vancouver, almost every mayor is represented at the Metro Board, and I think your mayor should always be one of the people represented at the Metro Board, because the leader of your city elected to that position. I think there's only 3 mayors, 2 who choose not to be on the board, is Mr. Fassbender from Langley City. I don't know his name, but the mayor of Bowen Island, because he has a part-time job and he can't make the meetings. And the other mayor is Mr. Green, who was taken off Metro Board by his council. The other thing by having council select or move a director is has more direct control. If a member, who has happened before where they have voted against the council's wishes, council can take them off. But if you wind up with a person that has been selected by the public and is going against council wishes, I don't think you could remove them for not moving in the council's interest. That would be a difficulty I see moving into this thing. I agree with Mr. Nicholson's comments that we can't do this on our own. If we're going to do this, it has to be through LMLGA or at Metro as a whole region to go in a different direction on this. The second issue that we talk about, and our frustration with Metro Vancouver and how it operates or runs, is a question I raised before, and I will raise it again, and mention is that either the province should have the Auditor General or the Controller General go in, review all of Metro Vancouver from governance, financial structure, and do a completely independent review, just as done in TransLink and other agencies. I think this would be a good thing to do. People at Metro tell us that they're a very well-run ship. Well, if they are, this independent review from the Auditor General or the Controller General would show that. But if not, it would show us where it could be improved and what the benefits, and that would probably be the best way at looking at the whole structure of it. But if you remove and go to directly elected members, not selected members, you're then going to have to remove the cities from the guaranteeing of the Metro debt. You can't do both. So those are my comments on this issue. Thank you.
Thank you. I added myself to the list. I had many of the same comments. Metro Vancouver truly is a co-op of all the municipalities, and those municipalities, their elected councils, voices are represented at the table at Metro. It was mentioned that not one of those Metro reps is elected. Well, actually, not one of them is not elected. They're all elected to represent their communities, and they sit at the pleasure of the council, not of the mayor, but of the council. The councils appoint them, even where there's only one representative to a community. And most of the communities in the Lower Mainland have only one rep. There's 5 of us that have more than one. Vancouver has a bunch, Surrey has a number, Richmond has 3, Burnaby has 3, Richmond has 2, Burnaby has 3, and Coquitlam has 2. And then everyone else has 1. And it's typically the mayor, as Councillor Asmundson said, but in 3 communities it's not the mayor, 2 by choice and 1 by vote of council, because that particular mayor was seen to not be representing the council. And I don't take a real bunch of issue with that. I take issue with some of the ways in which Metro Vancouver operates, and I take issue with the same thing. I think their expenses related to travel are out of whack. That we do have some really unusual people who don't question seem to get the trips, as Councillor Sikora says. Oddly enough, I question a lot, and I haven't been on any Metro trip except I once got to go to Tynehead Park in Surrey. All expenses paid. It is a structure that I think needs to be reviewed. I think there's elements of it that need analysis, and I would like to see that analysis for the good of the region and for good of the work that it does, because Metro Vancouver does some really, really important work in sewer, in water, in solid waste, and now in an expanding role. It now is into regional planning, and it's into air quality and water quality, and even the food distribution system. And for that matter, into cultural services. It now has a website that does a bunch of cultural services for the region. I think that expanded role is something we should look at more carefully, and I think the way in which Metro Vancouver operates needs to perhaps have some examination. But this isn't the way to do it. This, as Councillor Asmundson pointed out, I think accurately, would require changes to the letters patent. I think Councillor Lynch said that. I think Councillor Nicholson said that. It would require changes to the way in which Metro Vancouver is constituted. It isn't constituted properly to allow this, and I think this kind of mechanism would have all kind of unintended consequences. So while I support the idea of trying to find a way to make Metro Vancouver more responsive, I don't think this is the right way to do it, and I don't think this is the right timing as well, as Councillor Reid pointed out. Councillor Robinson.
Thank you. I think it's actually been said before, so I'm just going to reiterate the issues are real that Councillor Sikora brought up. I too have some concerns about oversight and accountability. So we have a bunch of problems and things that we're concerned about. I'm just not convinced that this is the solution. So I don't think this is the context, but I would hope that we would have at some point some opportunity to have a conversation about what we would propose. I think this is going to keep rumbling for us, and hope that we can continue perhaps a strategic priorities meeting, what our concerns are and how would we go about bringing about some change and some better accountability, because I think those are real concerns. I'm not going to support this because I just don't think that this is the way to go about it, to directly address them.
Okay. And Councillor Reamer.
Thank you. Well, similarly, I'm not going to support this. This is a matter that has to be dealt with by the provincial government, by all the governments actually that make up Metro Vancouver, and by Metro Vancouver. I don't think it's fair to ask our citizens to do this. It goes against the process that's already in place. There's legal issues around it, but I do think that Councillor Sikora's issues are very valid. His concerns are very valid. And I, too, would like to continue on looking at this as to how we might best go about trying to switch the system so that the Metro Vancouver representatives are elected. But if that's going to occur, it's going to have to happen all over Metro Vancouver. And so there's quite an extensive process that would have to be undertaken with Metro Vancouver, with the provincial government, and it's going to take time. It's not just, it wouldn't be fair to ask our citizens to do this when it goes against the legal processes that are in place. And there could well be a time down the road where we are in a better position to be able to ask our citizens that. But I think at this particular time we're not. And so I won't be supporting this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Seeing no other speakers, the motion is the public opinion question. All in favor? Opposed are Councillors Nicholson, Reid, McDonnell, Asmundson, Reamer, Robinson, and Mayor Stewart. The motion fails.
On the subject of Metro Vancouver, item 12 concerns the Metro Vancouver Board and Brief. We have our representatives available to respond to questions and the recommendations to receive the Board and Brief for information.
Second.
All in favor? Councillor Robinson.
Actually, I have a question that's not related to this specific Board and Brief, but it is a Metro Parks Committee.
Sure.
I understand that June 1st Parks had a meeting and that there was what was on the table was a ban, a smoking ban in parks, Metro Parks, that Councillor Stevenson brought forward and was supported, and that it failed to ban smoking in parks. This is just my understanding sort of through the newspapers and stuff. I understand that you didn't support it, Mayor Stewart, you sit on parks, and I'm just looking for some rationale for why that wasn't supported.
I wasn't in the room. I was on CKNW doing an interview related to another issue at that particular moment, and when I returned to the room, the motion had already carried.
It failed. The motion was failed.
Sorry, the motion,
Right.
that motion had already been completed. This was at the last meeting of Metro Vancouver Parks Committee. I had actually had to step out of the room. I was on a radio interview with Bill Good.
Okay, because I'm quite disappointed that it wasn't, that it failed. But
it didn't fail, actually. I understand it didn't fail that close by by a close margin. By a close margin. I believe the motion that did pass eventually was a motion that put in place smoking areas inside the park rather than simply a blanket non-smoking in the entire park.
thank you.
Councillor Lynch.
Thank you. You already give accolades to the Parks and Rec Department, but I have to say I was there at 12 o'clock noon. I was there when the fireworks went down, and I was walking home, and I was talking to so many residents, and I've had such good feedback. I just had to add my commendation because I thought it was very well organized from start to finish. It was everything that I expected, and I was very proud of the staff, and I was proud of the city that day, and I thought it was a great celebration for Canada Day. Thank you.
Absolutely. Councillor Sikora.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, I agree with Councillor Lynch. The fact is it was very well done and very professionally done, and certainly a lot of people in there have made good comments, and I believe that when we get the count, there'll probably be around 70,000 people that turned out, and it was great. It was very well done. Thank you very much, because I know that you were there all day and all evening. You're almost around the clock in there, so I really appreciate that, Lori. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for those additions. Councillor Reamer.
Thank you. I too want to thank staff for a job well done. It was absolutely fabulous. I was there at noon as well, and we finished off the evening with our fireworks display, and the fireworks were absolutely phenomenal. They were just fabulous, and so Thank you ever so much. Do we have any definite count? Councillor Sikora mentioned 50,000. Do we have any numbers?
Through the chair, thank you. We're still calculating the details, but we are estimating between 70,000 people that attended over the course of the day. Some people came in the early afternoon and then maybe left to have some quiet time and then returned for the evening. So there was a lot of back and forth. But our estimates at this time are between 60 and 70,000, and we're doing some more detailed mapping to nail it down.
Thank you.
And all of them appeared to be in front of me in the food lineup. I never did get any of the food. It sounded delicious, though. I'm advised by our clerk that we did not complete the motion to receive the board and brief. All in favor of receipt? Opposed? That controversial item has carried unanimously. I want to remind everybody, if you are watching this and you haven't yet paid your taxes, it's technically too late to do it by counter, but our drop box is still available till midnight tonight and probably won't get open until some hours after that. So please get your taxes and your homeowner grant signed and in the basement so you won't get any penalties. That's on the ground floor of City Hall. Any further items? Seeing none. Moved by Councillor Asmundson, seconded by Councillor Robinson to adjourn. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously. And we'll go to the public question period. We have a public question period on tonight's agenda. Please, we'll ask people to ask. There is an opportunity for people to ask questions on tonight's agenda, subject to a 2-minute maximum time limit without preamble. One question each. If there are no more speakers, eventually you can ask another question. The question period is a maximum of 15 minutes, and please, we ask you to respect that. Please step forward if you have a question on tonight's agenda. Mr. Trumley.
I'll be quick. I'm Jack Trumley at 2314 Sumter Drive in Coquitlam. Just quickly, I want to thank you for the pesticide ban bylaw. Regardless of jurisdiction, whether it's federal, provincial, you've shown leadership, and that's what's important. You've sent the message to the community and to the provincial government and the federal government that we care about our communities and that you want to keep them safe. So I congratulate you for that. The question I have under that, you talked about the variety of outreach strategies, including public notices and so on. Will there be, including in that, I assume you'll be adding in what types of pesticides not to use anymore, but will you be including any alternatives to, other than cosmetic pesticides, to be used in the lawn?
I believe that's in the education program, but I'm going to ask Mr. Suzak for that.
Yeah, thanks, Your Worship. Yes, it's an excellent comment, and that word needs to get out. Our understanding is that a number of the landscape companies that have historically or traditionally provided, lawn spraying services, a number of them are using natural products and that sort of thing. So, yeah, we want to get that word out. Thanks very much.
And the other addition to that comment, will you also include alternatives to lawns, where people who want to change their lawns will do something else besides having a lawn? Will you include the education around that?
We'd be delighted to. Thank you. We'll take a look at that.
And my last question, I will be very quick. It talks about staff, question 8, directing staff to commence on a fuel system strategy around 2011 and around equipment acquisition. Will you be looking at zero-emission vehicles and hybrid vehicles at that time as well?
I believe we already do, but go ahead, Mr. Suzak.
Yes, Your Worship. We do take a look at vehicle sustainability. We've done some, over the past year, we've actually done some significant, what we call right-sizing of vehicles. Instead of large trucks, if bylaw officers can get around in Honda Fits and whatnot, that's what we do. The fuel system strategy issue that you're referring to it's a bit of a complex matter. We have a fueling system at the yard, but it's aging, and we need to look at our strategy over the next 20 to 30 years. How should we fuel? Should we even have on-site fueling, for example? There are alternatives. That's the thrust of that. But we are also looking at low emission or electric vehicles. Absolutely we are.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Any other questions? Any questions on tonight's agenda? Seeing none, thank you very much for coming. Have a good evening.